I'm Manuel Rensink, Director of Innovation Strategy at Currency and host of the Finnovators podcast. All my views and my guest views are solely opinions and might not reflect the views of Currency. You should not treat any opinion by myself or my guests as an inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but solely as a personal expression of opinion. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Paolo, you're the CTO of both Bitfinex and Tether, as well as the co-founder of Hole Punch. Besides that, you're a well-known Bitcoiner, and you're involved in Bitcoin initiatives in El Salvador and Plan B in Lugano, for instance. So before we delve into these topics, tell us a bit more about yourself. So what was your career path and also your belief system that led you to become this personality really in the crypto space?
Yes, so I've been a coder for all my life. I recall that the first computer I got and the first super small program I wrote was a long time ago, 30 years ago when I was 8. And it grew as a passion. I cannot think my life without coding. I think that is for me at least is a way to be creative, like a painter, but you just write code and magic happens. And so that's something. So in a way, is a way to enable creativity to explode. I coded throughout all my youth, and then went to the university, and there I refined my math and physics background. I studied computer science, math applied to computer science, and then I worked in as a researcher for a university. There was a fun project, was about high performance and high resilient communication systems for military. That was extremely exciting, although as I'm Italian, so as many times happens, you don't get paid much. So I decided to look into something else and bring the knowledge I grew that was basically in distributed applications and parallel computing and high resilient networks into finance. I thought that finance was exploding in a way, in a literal sense, because when I came to the realization was 2007, 2008. And then I started studying a lot of finance, and then I didn't know about Bitcoin yet, but that was also 2008 was the time when Bitcoin was conceived. And I started building portfolio management systems for a few hedge funds between Switzerland and London. Then moved to London to trying to create a company. Well, I created my own startup called Cluster that would provide cloud portfolio management systems to small and medium-sized hedge funds in the city and throughout Great Britain and Switzerland. Then I discovered Bitcoin, and that everything changed, because in a way, you are in the financial sector, and you know pretty well how sometimes it is. My daily challenge with my startup was not trying to solve complex problems, but was trying to optimize, trying to clean the data that the hedge funds that were my customers were getting from the different banks, custodians, trading venues, clearing firms. The data was a mess, and like 90% of the time was spent in trying to fix all these small issues. And then on the other side, I was reading about Bitcoin and its blockchain. That was a system that would allow everyone that was running a node to look at the very same data because of the consensus, right? This algorithm that would make sure that everyone was looking at the very same data. So actually, although Bitcoiners tend to see that they understand Bitcoin or understood Bitcoin, from the beginning, Actually, the first realization that I had about Bitcoin was from the technical level. I liked the blockchain as a way to solve my day-to-day problems, right? Rather than nowadays, I'm all over Bitcoin because of I truly believe that is the most the currency, the perfect currency that enables freedom. And you can see that much more in emerging markets, developing countries. But the truth, the simple truth for me at the beginning, Bitcoin was blockchain, and was a way to improve, optimize, and reduce the cost of running a global financial infrastructure. And it's kind of true nowadays. I can see how CBDCs would go in that direction. Sorry if I jump from one thing to another, but I'm thinking how I arrived to today, and this is my train of thoughts, and eventually I came to meet Giancarlo, that was the CFO, Giancarlo De Vasini, the CFO of Bitfinex, and Bitfinex was an exchange, a Bitcoin first exchange, founded in 2012, and the Bitfinex was becoming really quickly one of the most popular exchanges back then, but they had growing pains. If you think about the exchanges ecosystem in 2013, 14, more than trading platforms, there were I would say e-commerces for Bitcoins, right? So and Bitfinex was no different. So it was kind of slow. It was running. It was able to execute around 50 orders per second. That is, compared to trading venues, traditional trading venues, is like a drop in the ocean. And so, given my experience, I was asked to help optimizing and speed up Bitfinex. And so I joined in 2014 and started working on the matching engine. I kept working for years just on the matching engine and the low-level APIs, and so moved from 50 orders per second to 1 million orders per second nowadays. And actually, it's still, of course, a part leading the tech team in Bitfinex. And the strategy, I still write entirely the matching engine of Bitfinex still till today. Still love doing that. And Bitfinex kept growing. It's still one of the biggest exchanges in the world. We are focusing on financial freedom and trying to bring this the ethos of Bitcoin around the world. In 2017, also I joined Tether as CTO, and nowadays I'm leading the strategy in developing markets. Of course, I'm driving also the tech, the adoption of different blockchains, and all these things.
Okay, interesting. You were saying that you were really fascinated by the technology, by this database, which has this kind of unique governance characteristic. Of course, you said you moved to Bitcoin as the financial asset, and you're a big proponent of that. But tell me a bit more about how freedom and decentralization is important to you,
Yes.
and how you're realizing that.
First of all, I'm a big sci-fi passionate, and I like to think, and in sci-fi movies and books, you have always these post-apocalyptic words, or you have like these dystopic words sometimes. And for some reason, my brain is really stuck on that. So the way I approach things, even in Bitfinex, even in centralized systems, but in general, even more so in decentralized systems, is creating something that, as I sometimes refer, resists to the wrath of God. Means that whatever happens, right? So you have, in my opinion, you have always to design a system, especially if it's being said decentralized, in order to survive the most catastrophic events. And so I believe that the world has gone through different difficult times, well, throughout the history, right? So in generations and generation, we have seen a world of pain, and eventually it might happen again. And I think that currency, have now the technology to create a currency, and we did. That is Bitcoin. So humanity had the technology to create a currency that would survive to cataclysms, and that to me is why I was also so interested to Bitcoin. And it happens that this very same currency is a currency that, given its strength and given the fact that can resist to all kind of weird different scenarios, it can also resist to control. So it's, in a way, the fact that it can resist to control is what helps to Bitcoin to resist to really different geopolitical and in general cataclysms. At the same time, the fact that it can resist to cataclysms is also the reason why you cannot control it, because it's so decentralized. Is with mining, it's so dispersed that can actually is actually a game changer in that sense. And so I like the fact, as I said, I like the fact that is something that can remain for generations unmodified. And at the same time, I like the fact that, I'm Italian. I, spend my time in Switzerland, but also in London and, in Europe in general. And I feel like people living in Europe, including myself until a few years ago, are not really understanding well that Europe and North America are in a unique position where they see things differently, just because they didn't go through the pain that many emerging markets are going through and went through recently. And so I feel like sometimes when we look at the technology like Bitcoin, we are forgetting that there are people in this world that don't have a bank account, or they are under a different government style that is quite oppressive, and they need a technology that cannot be disrupted, a technology that cannot, a currency that cannot be controlled, just because they cannot rely on their own governments. Not saying that Europe can always rely on its own government. So also Europe, I think that would better start looking seriously at Bitcoin. Unfortunately, we are seeing that there are some different waves of reforms that might tend to diminish the importance of Bitcoin in Europe. But nevertheless, in general, I think that we are seeing, and what I am excited about is Bitcoin becoming a currency after 14 years, becoming a currency that is actually helping nations like El Salvador, like Argentina, like Turkey, that are and Ghana and Nigeria. They are these and Venezuela, and they can count so many others. They need a currency so that it's a lifeline for them, right? So in Turkey, in 18 months, you had 140% inflation. It's insane. So these fellows really need something that is stronger, something that they can hold in their hands, right? Throughout the entire history, especially in poorer countries, people were holding onto gold, right? They had their small stash of gold under the pillows, because that gold could be, you could, if you have to flee your own country, your city, you could grab that stash and run, right? Because gold was universally accepted and understood, and that's in a way Bitcoin is a digital version of gold. And I really like the fact that it's after just so few years, because remember it's just 14 years, we are seeing Bitcoin on the front page of many in all the medias, and also on the agendas of governments to understand it, or being concerned about, just because everyone understands nowadays that Bitcoin is not controllable. Not even China, that is most powerful country in the world nowadays, I believe, could control Bitcoin, and that tells a lot. So I think that we did a really fine job in, not me, well, of course, I'm no one, but in general, the community, this community did a great job in nurturing Bitcoin, and going on the very same direction. Few years ago is nowadays, around 7 years ago, I started thinking that Bitcoin was great, but in order to fulfill the concept of the individual sovereignty, right? I'm consider myself a sort of activist when it comes to also human rights, and I feel like privacy and freedom of communication is as important as freedom of money. I started to work with other developers to build a networking layer that nowadays is called Hole Punch. That is, in a simple way, is BitTorrent for communications, but also is, from the ethos point of view, I would consider it Bitcoin of communications, in the sense that there is no token, there is no blockchain, is an open protocol, is encrypted, is fully peer-to-peer, and we don't. There is so open, is that, and there is nothing inside. There is no token that we cannot make money out of it. We are just creating it because we feel is the most important thing to do, to continue in the same direction that that Bitcoin opened for us.
So on Hole Punch, I would assume that most people know Bitfinex as being one of the oldest and most established exchanges since 2012, and of course Tether as the largest and most traded stablecoin. But Hole Punch, you mentioned there, so we can think of this as a unique peer-to-peer protocol for communications. There's a few use cases, I believe. First, chat. Right now, browser chat and soon mobile chat, I believe. And then also secure video communications. I even saw a use case where it could be used for baby cameras, for instance, which are famously always getting hacked and always making the news. So that's interesting. So you're taking this ethos of privacy and decentralization from blockchain, from money, to communications as well with Hole Punch. That's interesting. And I believe also you're working, or you're applying Hole Punch to some of the services provided by Bitfinex. Is that correct?
Yeah. So definitely the first application that we created with Hole Punch was actually Keet, KEET.io. That is peer-to-peer video and chat app. So the reason why we focused on that as a first use case was actually to prove that, in a way, cloud is a big lie, because we have been taught by big tech, right, by Google, Apple, Microsoft, Zoom, that in order to talk to your friend, you have to pass through their data centers, and we wanted to show that is not actually true. We wanted to show that we could build a better product, a faster product, a cheaper product, without the need of any data center. Actually, the data centers are the bottleneck of everything. So imagine this simple scenario, right? So I'm sitting at the desk and I have a friend in the same city, and I send him a message on WhatsApp. What will happen when I press send? That message will travel thousands of kilometers to the most nearby WhatsApp data center, Facebook data center, and then that message will be routed back to my friend in the same city that is 2 kilometers from me, 1 kilometer from me. Internet was built to be peer-to-peer, right? So where devices could connect to each other. But due to the fact that there are economical incentives, that is not true anymore. And we have been always told that is because our devices are not powerful enough and capable enough to connect to each other. and that it was true for like a Pentium 286, but suddenly is not true for an Intel Xeon or for a powerful iPhone. So what we did is actually it took 7 years to build this underlying networking layer called hole punch. That is, again, based on BitTorrent. If you remember, BitTorrent is the king of file sharing. And it is the only thing that survived to all the possible attacks from left and right, because it used actually BitTorrent is the first big use case of hole punching technique. That is a way for two devices, so two phones, one phone and one computer and so on, or two computers, to connect directly, even if they are behind firewalls, without any problems, without any central servers or intermediaries. So, and that was BitTorrent that started using that heavily. It was a known technology before, but BitTorrent put it into action on a large scale. And BitTorrent also used another approach. So in order for people to advertise the files that they could share from their computer, they were using this technology called distributed hash table, DHT. That is a big global database that doesn't stay on one single server. It's like a database that is divided by the number of nodes that are composing that network. And so suddenly you have this unstoppable file sharing system. And what we thought was, if a file sharing system that could allow peers, devices, to exchange terabytes of movies or files or whatever was good enough 15 years ago, why we are not using the very same idea and technology, of course improved after 15 years, to do video communications or to do internet communications? And that's exactly what we did. So we took this technology, we worked for 7 years on top of it, and we wanted to show that now we can have a video chat that, by the way, works from Dubai, works from China, works from everywhere, because there is no way to, the way certain countries are banning communications. It's just they are banning the IPs of the different data centers. It's super simple. But if you start connecting one device with another device, you cannot do that anymore. It's too complex to ban the communication, because also the communication is encrypted. So no one knows the metadata. So this is why I'm saying that is Bitcoin for communications, because it's really unstoppable in that sense. And so if you try Heat, you will see that, first of all, the latency of the communication, the video chat or the audio chat, is insanely lower than anything else. So you chat with your friend. First of all, you can go 4K as a video chat, because it's just based on your bandwidth and your friend's bandwidth. I can share with you a 4 gigabyte file, right? Imagine that I drop in the chat a 4 gigabyte video. And usually the way it works, right, in a simple way, imagine that you are on Zoom. Zoom blocks you after 100 megabytes. But let's say that as an hypothesis that you could drop a 4 gigabyte video on Zoom. The way Zoom client would work is that this video would be uploaded to Zoom servers, so it takes some time. And then you can download it and play it on your computer. But in Kit, we are demonstrating the power of the DHT and hole punching and swarming. That was the other beautiful technique that BitTorrent created or started to adopt massively. Swarming is, if you remember, imagine that you had like a file on your computer, and then another device would start downloading that file. That other device, or let's say that one of your friends would start downloading that file. Then while he was downloading it, he could start sharing some chunks of that file with other people. And as a chain reaction, the download would become much faster. So what we are doing is that, imagine that there are 10 people in a chat room. I drop a 4 gigabyte file, a video file. You can immediately, as soon as I drop the file in the chat, start pressing play. And you can start streaming directly from me. But while you're streaming, the other friends in the chat can download it from me and from you. and so on and so forth. So it becomes insanely faster. So that's why it doesn't, I can still have big chats with many people and not have my bandwidth being choked, because we are still applying the very same techniques that BitTorrent was using. And the beauty of it is that since you don't have to download the entire video from me, that is what you would do with Zoom, because you can move the slider of the video at half time, and you just download the new chunks. So it's a completely different experience. The latency is lower because we don't pass through data centers. Heat and hole punch will always find the shortest path to connect the peers. So that's the beauty of it. So that's why you can see that I'm quite passionate about that. But because it took so many years to nail the technology, and now if you think about it, it can be used on so many things. As you know, I'm still, well, of course, I'm super passionate about finance, and what I think is that financial data is concentrated in a few hands. Like Bloomberg has access to the majority of financial data. But I feel like, and they are the ones that are monetizing it most than anyone else. And what if we can use a protocol like Hole Punch to actually create feeds? And we are doing that with Synonym. We are creating open source data feeds that anyone can. So it's just a protocol feed, and is by definition there is no token inside, right? So anyone can take it, and then you can decide, so you can publish your market data feeds, your financial feeds to anyone, and you can decide if you want to be paid or not. If you want to be paid, you can choose whatever currency, right? So I'm a big fan of decoupling the data from the payment. So you can decide to give your data for free, or you can decide to be paid. And then if you want to be paid, we support Lightning Network, support Tether, but you can add anything, because any other payment system, because it's free, it's open source, right? But that is another big thing. And we are demonstrating with Bitfinex that we are going to create we are putting out all our financial feeds that we produce in Bitfinex for free out there, right? Anyone can take it and reuse it and so on. But we will encourage other exchanges, trading firms, market makers to produce their own feeds. Be paid or not, it doesn't matter. But then you can have aggregators, and we can make an economy that is based on finance that is more open. Because not everyone can afford to pay $1,500 per month for a Bloomberg terminal, right? So that is the thing that I believe, as humanity grows, more and more people need access to financial data, because nowadays a student cannot afford that. A student have to go on Yahoo Finance and trying to get some data. That isn't fair. The more if data is free, and I think that the progress of humanity will be much faster. And so it was the ethos of internet to have access to allow access to information. And not saying that information has to be free. Again, information should be paid, and good information should be paid, but should be paid in a fair way, right? It shouldn't be hostage by a few companies.
I see, and that obviously Keith and Hole Punch have very broad applications. Interesting how you link it back to the financial world there as well, and that taking you back to your early days in finance, of course. With regard to the technology, it sounds a little bit like the way of optimizing this data distribution sounds a little bit like Netflix, the way they optimize their streaming. Is that correct, or am I off the mark?
So Netflix has an interesting model. Definitely, they are the biggest streaming company in the world. I think that they are making like 2% of the entire internet traffic or something like that. So Netflix rightfully, well, they have their own centralized business model, but they are trying to rely on trying to reduce the burden on their data centers, trying to optimize the streaming through different geographical locations and so on. So it's extremely interesting. But of course, being a private company that makes money on ensuring that they have full control over data, is their limitation factor, right? So basically, we go back to the point where, we are as well private companies, but we don't want at all to be in the mix of anything. So the point is reduce intermediaries. I have a file on my computer, I need to send it to you with no middleman. Simple as that. And so in a way, I can argue that we could do a much better Netflix than Netflix through Hole Punch.
Okay, I got it. Interesting. Now you are the public face of both Bitfinex and Tether, and now also Hole Punch. So where, for instance, I guess most of my audience wouldn't even know who is for instance, the CEO of Bitfinex or of Tether and Hole Punch. So is this by design, and how did this happen?
It's much simpler than what people would think. So both Bitfinex and Tether, right? Bitfinex started in 2012 and Tether started in 2014. And both the CFO and CEO of Bitfinex and Tether, respectively Giancarlo De Vasini and Jean-Louis van der Velde, have been entrepreneurs for all their entire lives, but they have also been private people. When we all enter in Bitcoin, no one could get. I couldn't think that we would become so big as companies, right? So it was about passion. It was about helping the technology, and not everyone wants to be on the spotlight, right? So the companies are still private, and sometimes you are just not interested in that. And it's a fintech company. We are both Bitfinex, Tether, and a whole bunch fintech, but more tech companies, I would call them. And I'm fine going out there to speak about both financials and the technology. In a way, they are fairly interlinked, since we are, it's about crypto. The crypto is finance and blockchain altogether. So there is, the right term that was also simple. There is no conspiracy theory. It's simple as that. By the way, Giancarlo and JL are speaking. So, in our world, although we like to think that everything is decentralized, since both Tether and Bitfinex are centralized companies, and especially Tether relies on banking and good banking because it holds a lot of capital. Their role is actually talking to regulators and talking to the banks and talking to the big customers. So there is no big customer that didn't have the chance or didn't hear daily from Giancarlo, for example. It's the business is critical. I have the simple job of going around and then talking about technology, but they are actually the ones that are, ensuring that we have a great relationship with the banks.
Yeah, okay. You're being modest there. I don't think it's a simple job, and you're representing something that is, especially when it comes to Tether, sometimes controversial. It gets a lot of negative criticisms. It gets a lot of FUD. You have millions of people on crypto Twitter, of course, that you have to deal with. So I don't envy you that role, but so I think you're quite brave, and then to do that for three companies. So, but then on Tether, of course, it's now the number 3 crypto by market cap. It's the number 1 crypto by trading volume. There's more Tether being traded every day than Bitcoin and Ethereum combined. And it's for instance, I think 10x the volumes of your nearest competitor, USDC. So obviously Tether has become systemically very important, and that's why your C-suite has to, of course, engage with regulators and so on. It's also, Tether has been a very important building block when it comes to DeFi. So I was wondering, what are your opinions on Ethereum, which is host to most of the DeFi world, and DeFi ecosystems themselves? I don't hear you talk that much about it, so I'm really curious what your opinions are here.
So I find DeFi really interesting. So I have mixed feelings in general, not because I don't want to enter too much in the politics of it, but I feel like, so DeFi is a really interesting model, right? But at the same time, we nowadays, of course, after FTX, we tend to argue that DeFi is a better use case than centralized exchanges, for example. That in a way it is, but at the same time, sometimes the memory of humans is quite short. But I really well remember all the DeFi rug pulls in the last 2 years and a half or 3 years, right? So I think the end problem of everything is always the human being, rather than the technology. And so I think that DeFi had few great years and is set to still grow, but might be subject. I mean, I'm also talking a lot myself with the regulators, and I feel like DeFi has two main advantages, I would say, compared to centralized exchanges, for example. The first one is non-custodial. So you have money on your ledger, for example, and as long as you can deploy them on a DeFi, for example, you assign them to a smart contract. As long as the smart contract is safe, and that is a big question mark, then you are kind of safe and no one can steal the money from you. That's beautiful. That is something that is a big win compared to a centralized exchange. The second big win so far is privacy. So, of course, exchanges, more and more centralized exchanges, are subject to the travel rule, for example, and additional increasing KYC requirements. But at the same time, it is becoming clearer and clearer that, in a way, the size of DeFi, or let's put it another way, we are hearing more and more regulators being interested to make sure that DeFi will move to the same or will have the same KYC AML requirements than centralized exchanges. And the argument is that it's entirely possible because you can apply, for example, allow lists to DeFi. So you can argue that, and so if people would care only about keeping or holding their own money, so the non-custodial aspects, that would be still fine, right? So because you can still hold your own money, you can still have full control over your assets because a DeFi will still be a non-custodial, but at the same time, you might be subject to the same KYC AML requirements than centralized exchanges. Because the truth is that although we like to think that DeFi is created by these big DAOs, so DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations where there is no central coordination. The 99.9% of these projects have central coordination. So the point is that regulators will knock on the door of these groups and say, well, now, and tell them, now you have to add the same KYC and ML practices that centralized exchanges have to abide to. So what I see as a future of DeFi is non-custodial still. That is great. I really like that. Probably they will lose the hedge on privacy because KYC and ML requirements will be tightened up for DeFi. But you have also downside, that is speed, right? For example, Bitfinex matching engine can process 1 million transactions per second because you have one single server, multiple cores. You can use all the performance you can there, right? You can squeeze as much performance you can from that environment. With DeFi, you still rely on a blockchain. Even the fastest blockchain, that is Solana, has some troubles, and even it has a 400 millisecond block time. So it means that all the actions will be propagated every 400 milliseconds. So it's still completely another world compared to centralized exchanges in terms of performance. So basically, my point is that I feel like DeFi has a big role to play, but DeFi will likely change shape compared to what we have been seeing so far in the past few years.
Okay, and what do you hold of the argument that centralized exchanges like Bitfinex that have these fiat and banking system connections on and off ramps, that those should be regulated, and that DeFi, it being code, it not having these on ramps and these links back into the real world, except through these centralized exchanges, that would remain unregulated. And anyway,
Well,
it's
don't
code,
get
and
me.
anyway, we don't know where it sits. And yes, even if some of the founders, the code is out there and it's immutable on the internet.
Well, first of all, don't get me wrong. I think that DeFi should remain free, but what my fear is that the regulators have a different opinion. So unfortunately, I don't make the rules. And the second issue is that you would be right in a sense that, or well, of course, this is just my opinion, but in my opinion, the fact that I completely agree that code is freedom. That's why I'm doing hole punch, right? That is the biggest expression of code is freedom. But there is a big difference. Hole punch doesn't make money. So if you are a small group and you take a fee, a cut of all the money that is made by a certain smart contract, in a way, regulators can still argue that that is a centralized model. So if you are serious about decentralization, you shouldn't hold the contract, by its attributes, in a way, right? So you should let it run free. The more ties you have with a specific single group, the lower the arguments that it's actually a decentralized program.
Yeah, that's fair. And what about the safety of smart contracts? Do you think a smart contract can be totally safe?
I think so. I mean, we are seeing some smart. I think we are seeing some, for example, Aave or I think Curve. They never got hacked so far. So I think that there are ways to create safe smart contracts, and of course, it takes time and it takes ton of reviews. And but so I'm as in normal in all the different situations. It's normal to you still rely on the human being. Good coder, great quality of the code, no issues. Average coder or a rushed up coder, you end up in having big problems in terms of security.
You mentioned earlier CBDCs. What about CBDCs? Are they evil? Is there a role for them? Are they inevitable? What is your opinion? How do they compare to USDT?
Yeah, so that is a really interesting question, because I feel like sometimes we tend to look at from the wrong perspective. So first of all, I would start with the argument that it's unthinkable that, imagine, let's pick Europe, for example, the Central Bank of Europe. Let's not believe for a second that Europe will launch their stablecoin, their CBDC, on Ethereum or Solana or Avalanche or any other kinds, right? Imagine the European Central Bank have to deal with the Ethereum fork from proof of work to proof of stake and choosing which one to support and so on, right? So no way. So the only way CBDCs will only run on permissioned blockchains. There is no other way around. Now, maybe a small country in the middle of the ocean will use Ethereum, right? But big countries, important currencies will have their own currency. Also, CBDCs are tricky also for the government. Now, governments all want to rush in saying, all the governments want to say, we are working on a CBDC. But the truth is that it's extremely risky also from their side. Right now, for example, the CBDC could replace the cash. But the thing is that cash doesn't hold interest. If you are creating a CBDC, would the governor, would the central bank allow interest on that money? Because in the end, money is already digital. So, but it sits on banks, and it sits on a really poor banking technological infrastructure. So CBDCs would make sense in order to optimize and reduce the costs of the banking system. So going back to the beginning of my history in finance, I think that the technological financial industry infrastructure is kept together by rubber and bands. If suddenly all the interbanking settlement systems would use blockchain technology, that would be an immense cost saving operation. And that makes sense to me because in a way, again, money is already digital. But the difference is that when you start asking every single one of your citizens to start interacting with that blockchain, and you start asking every one of your citizens to hold that currency that is already digital, then you have multiple choices, right? So you have to decide what you want, where you want to go. Because of course, first of all, there is the dystopian future where nowadays, if I buy a coffee at Starbucks, the central banks wouldn't know, right? So only my bank would know because they settled transaction. But the data is much more fragmented, and so, that is a big issue. But the government could be interesting for certain governments, but also is a huge issue in terms of privacy laws. So the entire privacy laws, especially in Europe, there are really severe privacy laws. Imagine the GDPR. Think about it, right? So how even the central bank could comply with the GDPR? They could open up to lawsuits in a certain way if they mismanage the data. So it's an enormous risk. The second big risk is interest. So if money becomes digital, so can they apply positive interest and can they apply negative interests? Or should they apply only positive or negative? So in this moment, people hold cash, and on cash, there is no positive, no negative interest. So there are so many unknowns that before taking the step of from a central bank to replace cash and go fully into a CBDC, I think will pass still many, many years.
I agree that there is no way that CBDCs will be on public blockchains anytime soon. I also don't think that they will go down to the retail level, but rather stay at wholesale level, if anything.
Agreed.
But imagine that there is a world where you do have a CBDC on a blockchain. What then is the role of Bitcoin, for instance? Would you see CBDC as the one that allows a certain kind of transparency and certain kind of breach of privacy, but perhaps accepted by society, and Bitcoin to be like the cash as we have it today? Let's say the paper cash will disappear and Bitcoin will now be the digital cash. Could that be a use case?
Well, I think that Bitcoin is the last resort cash. So the problem is CBDCs would still be censorable, right? So if you have your own national currency, but on a blockchain, doesn't matter, right? So the central bank or who is running the CBDC could still could still block your money. Imagine the classic example is if you don't delete that tweet, your transaction will be declined, right? So that is what Bitcoin is for. As I said at the beginning, you have always to think to the worst case scenario. Eventually, I hope not, but history says that things always go wrong eventually. And at that moment, you want to have a currency that you can rely on.
Absolutely. As we are wrapping up now, we have about 5 minutes left or so. From your interactions with regulators, policymakers, how confident are you that in Europe and the US, they will find the balance between allowing for innovation as well as protecting consumers? Or have you seen a shift in attitude, maybe post FTX and all the other debacles, where it's now more an attitude of, no, when in doubt, ban it?
So I don't think that Europe and US will ban cryptocurrencies. First of all, I think that if they would do this move, they will give the entire hedge to emerging markets. Emerging markets will get so much talent, and will eventually, in the long run, become potentially even more powerful, especially than Europe, because you really don't. This technology is loved by many developers, right? It's about code, it's about freedom, right? So there is no way to stop an idea. And to me, what we are working on is an idea, right? An ideal. So I think that they won't ban it, but I think that it's likely that they will, at least in the short term, they will overreact on FTX. And I can see that already. But so the discussions with regulators were not that easy before. So nowadays are even harder because they always point back to FTX. But the answer to regulators is actually that what FTX did was illegal on on a possible way, independently from the crypto side of it, right? So we don't need more rules to protect ourselves from FTX. That was anyway illegal. So, but hopefully we can make our case with more and more with the regulators. We are working. We have a team that engage with the regulators to try to explain our point of view. And I know that many other crypto firms are in the same condition. We always are trying to regain the ground that we lost with FTX. So unfortunately, I feel like the short term will be much harder and harsher, but the medium and long term, things will shift in the right direction that will foster innovation.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that we have seen most of the fallout, or is there more to come? Perhaps the DCG entities could still shock the markets, maybe Wobi, maybe Binance. So is there more fallout to come, or do you see 2023 to be, do you see it in a positive light? Are you expecting some good things?
So I think that in 2023, we might see a few more fallouts. You name the elephant in the room nowadays, and that has a lot of Bitcoin under his pillow. And, who knows what will happen there. But, when it comes to Bitcoin, and the crypto in general, I'm always positive and bullish myself, with no financial advice intended, but this might be. So I think that we are going to see, though, a recovery. People are, kind of fed up. And there is an interesting fact to me is that, in a way, if you are an institution and you want to buy a serious amount of Bitcoins, it's really hard nowadays because no one is selling Bitcoins anymore. So it's really hard to find Bitcoins to buy. And that tells a lot, right? So I think that, for how much we are, we saw so much. And I think that, the problem is that there is not much left, at least when it comes to Bitcoin to sell, in my opinion. For the rest, they have, other tokens might have different supply models, but that's why I'm just referring to Bitcoin in this case. But I'm positive for 2023. With Tether, I just want to say that, we, at least in 2022, we demonstrated that although many were scared, or at least there was so much FUD around Tether, Tether is the only thing that resisted in a way, right? So it's, I think that is a good example of a company well run.
Paolo, that was great. Thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you for yours. It was nice. I really appreciated the chat.